Welcome back to tonight's Andrea Kaye Show. Joe Biden is pulling all kinds of nasty stuff out of his bag, or at least he's pretending to be. We never really know who's calling the shots. In addition to partnering his crackhead son and giving money to Ukraine, he cooked up some deal with some union so that federal workers, I believe 40,000 of them, could work from home, not have to come in. There's even allegations that some of these workers are doing side hustles, not even doing the work for the federal government that they're supposed to be doing, working side gigs and making money while being paid by the taxpayers. And Trump said, not so fast. When there's a new sheriff coming to town and you're either going to show up to work or you're going to get the boot. Joining me now to discuss is Mark Mix. He's president of the National Right to Work Committee, which is a almost 3 million member public policy organization. And he also serves as president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark Mix, welcome back to the Andrea Kaye Show.
Andrea, good to be on with you. And you're right, this is a big story. This is kind of, what was it, the parting gifts for the people on the game shows who didn't win the big prize. They would get a parting gift. Well, this is like a parting gift for union officials. And frankly, folks in California know just how powerful these government unions are. And now Joe Biden's cut a deal with the American Federation of Government Employees that represents about 49,000 Social Security Administration employees. And for the next 5 years, their contract says they can work from home. So we'll see what President Trump decides to do when he comes in and basically says, look, I need you to come back to work. Otherwise, it's going to be a battle between this government union, this big, powerful government union, and President Trump. We'll see who wins. It'll be interesting.
Well, that's my Reagan impersonation. Didn't Ronald Reagan win a little battle with some air traffic controllers?
He did indeed, Andrea. And, you know, while a lot of folks, a lot of union officials frame that as like this union-busting moment that started, you know, in the 1980s and has continued to this very day, what happened there was a provision in the contract for those air traffic controllers that said you cannot strike. They ignored the law. They went out on strike. President Reagan said you have X amount of time to get back to work and get on the job. If you don't, you will be fired. When they called, they didn't, you know, they thought he was bluffing. He wasn't bluffing. He fired them all. In fact, I think he went even farther and said, you can't work in this business for the air traffic control ever again since you violated the law and are lawbreakers.
That's excuse me for interrupting, but I'm just flashing because that's so typical. That's such an acting threat, right? He hit Reagan coming out of Hollywood. There was this threat: you'll never work in the business again. So with this contract, this is so egregious to the American people, Mark Mix. I mean, there's Americans that are having to work 2-3 jobs, can't feed their kids because of this Biden economics, disaster, and yet wanting to reward these union workers with being able to be layabouts all day. What can Trump do? So let's say they've got this in the contract, it's ironclad. Can't Doge come in, Vivek and Elon Musk and say, you know what, we don't need all y'all. Half of you can skedaddle and just be fired.
Yeah, well, I think there's going to be some discussion about that, I would suspect, especially if they ask them to come back to work and be nice about it. Come back to work. Let's work back in the buildings that we're paying $7 billion a year to lease and to operate for our federal agencies, including, you know, the VA and the Commerce Department and the Education Department and HUD and all those agencies. Most of those agencies still aren't over 50% of people working back in their offices that we're paying for. In fact, Joni Ernst of Iowa said that she believes that only 6% of all the full-time workers are working full-time in their office. But I think you're right. I think what's going to happen is DOJ will look at this. But what the union has and what the power they have is they'll say that you're violating the contract, any reduction in force, any change in the working conditions, i.e. working from home or coming back to the office, must be negotiated with the union officials. And what they'll probably do if Trump threatens, they'll go to what is the Federal Labor Relations Authority, which is the adjudicate body for government employees in the federal government, and they will file unfair labor practice charges against the president. It will be litigated, and the bureaucracy will have their way, and there probably will be some favorable judge that will issue a temporary injunction saying you can't fire these people, you can't move them. It'll be a legal battle, but I think it's a battle we ought to have, and I think Trump's probably up for it. I think Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are up for it. because I think the American people are up for it, Andrea.
Well, it's ridiculous. The rest of us, Mark Mix, in the private sector, don't have tenured where we can't be fired, regardless of whether or not we produce, regardless of whether or not we show up. My mother worked for the federal government and pretty much every department except state. She might have even worked for State Department. And as a chief admin officer, she was never able to fire anybody, even when she caught people stealing. This is just a perfect example of how completely bloated and just off the rails our government is. Why do we even have a union for federal workers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andrea. And, it's funny. I had a friend that lived in Temecula, California. He's passed away now. He's a great friend. One day he calls me and he says, Mark, what is the most abusive job in America today? And I said, somebody who's pouring steel at Bethlehem Steel or whatever, or the most dangerous job. He goes, no, it's working for government. Because if the premise of unionization is that there's abuse and there's, safety violations, it's unsafe and all this, that's one of the reasons why we basically introduced the idea of unionization allegedly back in the 1930s. So today, when you look at the government, whether it be in Sacramento or whether it be in Washington, D.C., and you look at the power of these unions, then you must surmise that the most dangerous place to work is government because they have the highest union density of any institution in America today. But your question is a good one. Why do we force governments, elected officials, to negotiate with private organizations over the terms and conditions of employment for government employees? It's wrong.
Especially since
Roosevelt thought it was wrong.
Well, we have a labor department. What's the point? I mean, there's not a condition that isn't already completely regulated in the workplace, whether it's everybody's got to have a 10-minute break and you can't work more than 5 hours if you don't go, whatever it is. We already have, there's a gazillion laws on the books to protect every worker. So all these unions is just little commie organizations or another way to look at it is just organized crime. And I'm going to hold a gun to your head, and either your brains or your signature is going to be on the contract. And it's just abusive to the American taxpayers who's footing the bill. Final thoughts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the fact that a private organization is in between taxpayers and elected officials is wrong. Franklin Roosevelt thought it was wrong. I think it's wrong. Allowing these people to unionize is one thing. Mandating the government negotiate with them is completely another, and it's wrong. And it's had really devastating effects in California and Washington, D.C., and Illinois, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, et cetera. I think Trump ought to do something about it, and he ought to start right here with this deal that Biden just cut.
Absolutely. Well, Mark Mix, president of National Right to Work Committee, thank you for being here, and have a very Merry Christmas.